Hello and welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive interviews with leading experts every weekday here on Arabiya English. I'm Tom Burgess Watson. Coming up on today's programme, following a controversial vote in the Knesset, the Trump administration rules out the possibility of the occupied West Bank being annexed by Israel. Vice President Vance says that's not going to happen. Meanwhile, in a major policy shift, President Trump imposes harsh sanctions on Russia for the first time in his second term. This amidst frustration over the ongoing war in Ukraine. All of that under discussion today, plus a check of the top stories in the United States. Hello and welcome to the programme. We begin with the news that the planned meeting between the US President Donald Trump and the Russian President Vladimir Putin now appears to have been stalled. The two leaders were expected to meet during the coming weeks in Budapest, but that is now on hold. Instead, President Trump has announced what he's described as tremendous sanctions on Russia's oil and gas sector, targeting major Russian companies Rosneft and Lukoil.
Today is a very big day in terms of what we're doing. Look, these are tremendous sanctions. These are very big. Those are against their two big oil companies, and we hope that they won't be on for long. I think that they'll certainly have an impact. They're massive sanctions. It's sanctions on oil. The two biggest oil companies, among the biggest in the world, but they're Russian. They do a lot of oil. And hopefully it'll push... hopefully he'll become reasonable, and hopefully Zelensky will be reasonable too. You know, it takes two to tango, as they say. They hate each other. These two people hate each other. This should be easier to do, but the level of hatred between Zelensky and Putin is very substantial.
We're joined now by Arseniy Yatsenyuk, who's the former Prime Minister of Ukraine. He joins us now. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. I was just looking at your Twitter account, or your X account, and you said today that we have reached what you said was, quote, an important and long-awaited turning point in this conflict. Why did you say that?
Well, you remember, well, first of all, thanks for having me. My pleasure to address your audience. That's for the first time. But the second issue is that you remember that President Trump made a verbal U-turn when he posted on his true social media that Ukraine could regain its territorial independence completely with the support of the European Union and NATO. And let me remind you that the United States is a dominant player in NATO. So it was a kind of verbal U-turn. This time, President Trump made an action U-turn. So he clearly decided, and he has realized, that Putin played President Trump in Anchorage. During that doomed meeting with the red carpet and limo sharing in Alaska in Anchorage. So President of the United States acted in a good faith. He expected to get real concessions out of the designated war criminal Putin. So he was very generous. That's what I know for sure, because a few days ago I came back from DC. He was very generous in offering quite comprehensive menu to Russians how to cut the deal. But what happened in the end? Putin just rejected his deal, and Putin wanted to humiliate the President of the United States. So his decision to turn the screw on Russia clearly shows that the US administration realized that Russia is dragging its feet, that Russia is not eager to cut any kind of real peace deal, that Russia hasn't changed its ultimate goal. It is to take over Ukraine, to fragment and to undermine the European Union and NATO, and that Russia, together with China, and I want to be very clear, together with China, because China is a crucial player in this war too, because China is an accomplice to Russia, want to reshape the global order and the global world. That's my reading of the situation.
Okay, and what President Trump has done is to impose sanctions on Russia's two largest oil companies. I'm talking about Rosneft and Lukoil. Now, the Kremlin is saying Russia is, quote, immune to sanctions. And I want to just ask your opinion, though. What do you think the impact of these new sanctions is going to be on the Russian economy?
Well, if one believes that the sanction is a silver bullet or a magic wand, so it's a kind of wishful thinking. Sanctions is just a piece of the puzzle, sir. Piece of the puzzle how to bring peace, a fair and just peace in Europe, and how to defend sovereignty and independence of Ukraine, and how to defend the values of the free world. You're absolutely right saying that the US administration imposed sanctions against two dominant oil crude producers, Rosneft and Lukoil. But the US administration imposed sanctions on all subsidiaries of these units, of these two legal entities. So it is a quite bold action on the side of the US administration to deprive Russia of its revenues from hydrocarbons. Where the problem where I see is that Russia managed, and that's true, partly managed to circumvent sanctions. There are two biggest consumers of the Russian oil, which is China and India. China is paying in renminbi, which is far from the control of the Federal Reserve. The same goes with India. It means that the US administration has to undertake the next step, which is to impose secondary sanctions on those who try to circumvent sanctions and to pay for the Russian oil and gas in different currency rather than the US dollar or euro, because I expect that Europeans will follow suit, and Europeans will definitely impose similar types of sanctions on the Russian energy sector.
Yeah, I mean, the Europeans have, in fact, announced a 19th package of sanctions on Russia. We'll talk about those in just a moment. But I wanted to ask you before that whether you think the effect of these sanctions on those two large oil providers is going to be to get Moscow to come to the negotiating table and in good faith. Do you think that will be the outcome?
Well, with all due respect, sir, I never believed in any kind of good faith in Russia because they don't have this faith. And they never had it. The idea is just to deprive Russia of its financing of the war chest. The idea is to exhaust Russia. The idea is to drain its resources. The idea is to limit Russia's ability to kill Ukrainians because they are literally just killing us, okay? 2 days ago, they launched a barrage of missiles and drones, more than 400 missiles and drones. They hit the kindergarten. They killed 2 kids of 6 months and 12 years old. And this is a never-ending horrible drama and tragedy. So the US administration decided to laser focus these sanctions on the hydrocarbons. Look at the Russian so-called stock market. These two companies, I mean Rosneft and Lukoil, they lost about 12 billion in capitalization in just 1 day. So Russian stocks are in nosediving. So I do understand that they will try to mitigate this happen. But the thing is that if these sanctions are combined with the similar steps against the new so-called Russian Black Sea Fleet, because the Russian Black Sea Fleet right now rests on the seabed, because we actually sank practically the half of the Russian Black Sea Fleet. But there is a new shadow fleet of Russian that illegally transports crude oil all over the world. These sanctions will be effective. Once again, it is not a silver bullet, but it is a very important step on the side of the US administration, where President Trump, for the first time during his second term, showed that he can bring peace through strength. And he showed and exhibited this strength.
Before we address that question, I was alluding to the latest package of EU sanctions, their 19th package. I mean, that's an extraordinary number of rafts of sanctions against Russia. I mean, we do hear from President Zelensky sometimes words to the effect that he thinks certain countries need to do more in order to pressure Russia. Which countries do you think he has in mind? Which countries would you like to see ramping up the pressure on Russia?
Well, definitely you should ask President Zelensky, but we are on the same page with the president because, look, I mean, Ukrainians, we are fighting for ourselves, but we are defending an entire world. because it's not just unacceptable, it is an egregious crime. What Russia did against Ukraine. This is the biggest military conflict. This is the biggest war after the World War II. So the beacon of democracy is, I still believe, is still the United States. The most prominent and the strongest and staunch supporters of Ukraine are in the European Union. The United Kingdom is just amazing. So they are straight to the point. There is no hot air on the side of the United Kingdom, but just clear-cut deliverables. I wish everyone to realize that they are not just donating to Ukraine. They are investing in their own security, because we as Ukrainians are paying the highest price. This is the price of the human beings, of the lives of the human beings. And there is no way to offset this price, just no way. And in terms of financial support to Ukraine, this is the best ever investment into the national security of NATO member states, and not only NATO member states, those who doesn't want to have wars and conflict all over the world. And if Ukraine wins, and I hope Ukraine will win, this would be the best lesson to those who want to conquer another countries, for those who want to invade and kill independent states and sovereign nations. And they will draw the best lesson that if you commit an act of aggression, you're going to pay for this. And this is my message to everyone. And you are the state-owned channel. And look, I commend the efforts of Riyadh and your country playing a role as a mediator. And we do really appreciate your efforts. You are the dominant player on the oil market. So I hope that your government and your country on the right side of the history.
So what do you say to those Americans who say, sometimes we hear people, even in the current administration, this is not our national security issue, it's not a priority for us as Americans, we're going to pull the plug on funding for this war. What's your message to people who think along those lines?
This is the exact message that I delivered in DC last week on a number of media outlets. I said, look, this is the best ever investment you had. Due to the fact that you contributed to your own security and provided both financial and military support to Ukraine, Ukrainian military managed to degrade severely by half Russian land forces. We compromised Russian intelligence. We compromised Russian cybersecurity. We sunk the Russian Black Sea Fleet. Russia faced casualties of around 1 million people. Could you imagine? Without any kind of military boots on the ground, I mean, either American or anybody else. And the second part of this message is that it's not just Russia. It is China. It is China that helps Russia, that provides financial resources to Russia, that has thrown a lifeline to Russia, that is an accomplice to this kind of egregious crime that Russia committed in Ukraine, and the China that wants to reshape the global order. And if we fail, this would trigger the domino effect all over the world. China is going after you, my dear American friends. And we, as Ukrainians, are on the front lines in defending the values of the free world. This is my message, and I want to reiterate it once again, because this is the truth. And they do understand. Look at the approval ratings. Look at the latest survey, public survey that had been published a few days ago. More than 70% of both Republicans and Democrats support Ukraine. And could you imagine that more Republicans support an idea to turn the screw on Russia rather than Democrats? Look at the bipartisan support in the US Senate. 85 senators co-sponsored the bill to impose secondary sanctions on Russia. So Americans do understand and realize that Russia and China pose a national security threat to their own interests, and that Ukraine's fight is actually the solution how to defend not only Ukraine, but how to defend and protect the homeland of the United States.
Now, you've mentioned on more than one occasion that you were in Washington last week, and so was President Zelensky. And President Zelensky held talks with President Trump at the White House. I mean, it's extraordinary when we look at what's happened since those talks took place. Budapest meeting has been cancelled. These latest sanctions have been announced, and it's only Thursday, less than a week since those talks took place. What can you tell us about what happened in those talks? Do you have any insights as to what the nature of the conversation was and how it went?
You know, Putin applied the same case scenario, the same pattern that he did before the Anchorage. You remember that he reached out to President Trump. They agreed on this summit in Alaska. President Trump expected to cut the deal. In the end, he played President Trump. The state dinner was canceled, and it went in a kind of debacle. So as designated war criminal, Putin realized that the US administration practically passed the decision to provide Ukraine with the long-range capabilities, I mean Tomahawk missiles. He urgently picked up the phone, so-called red line, and tried to reach out to President Trump, which he did. And he actually managed to convince President Trump to have another Anchorage, but only in Budapest. Just to tell your viewers, Budapest has a very notorious history for Ukrainians. In 1994, Ukraine relinquished its third biggest nuclear arsenal in the world under the Budapest Memorandum, and Russia, the United States, and the United Kingdom provided the security guarantees or security assurances to Ukraine that nobody under any circumstances would invade Ukraine. So in the end, Russia, that actually co-sponsored the Budapest Memorandum, invaded Ukraine, that voluntarily relinquished its third biggest arsenal. The idea that Putin had, that he wanted to have another Anchorage. But President Trump realized that there is no way, just no way. If Putin accepts his peace proposal, and his peace proposal was very clear, is an unconditional ceasefire, so he can get the Budapest. Otherwise, it's going to be another round of humiliation of the President of the United States. So the President assigned a Secretary of State, who is a seasoned politician, to hold talks with contemporary Ribbentrop. This is the Foreign Minister of Russia, Lavrov. In the end, Americans realized that it's another sham. It is another a kind of pretension. It is another way how to drag their feet and how to play the US administration, that there will be no deliverables. So they are just playing for time. And that's the reason why the meeting in Budapest was cancelled.
It sounds like
the US administration realized that they have to pass the decision to impose a new round of sanctions.
Okay, so it sounds like you found the whole idea of Budapest insulting for reasons that you gave, historical reasons. And I want to just ask you whether you think, I mean, there has been talk in the recent months of President Zelensky having to sit down at a table opposite President Putin. Do you think that is something that is inevitable? Do you think that will happen at some stage?
Look, it's a kind of, wishful thinking. I never believed in this. And you remember that after Alaska meeting, there was even an announcement that they're going to hold either trilateral or bilateral talks, trilateral between my president, President Trump, and suspected war criminal, or bilateral between my president and Russia. Look, it's no way. It's no starter. Look what's happening on the ground. I don't believe in any kind of hot air. I believe only in facts and what's happening on the ground. Russia is not eager to cut any kind of deal. So that's the reason why we need to pressure like hell on Russia, period.
Just tell us a bit more about what's happening on the ground. You've painted a picture for us of what the situation is like right now. I mean, obviously the fighting's continuing, winter is approaching, and that's usually a time when not much happens on the battlefield in the cold winter months. There have obviously been airstrikes on Kyiv in the last 24 hours. Just tell us, what is the current situation on the battlefield as you understand it?
Sir, it is a war. And that's the description of what's happening. With the atrocities committed by the Russian military, with the killing, rape, abduction of Ukrainian children, with the hitting of Ukrainian energy facilities, with the war crimes. It is a war. This war has been going on for 11 years. Because maybe not every viewer of your distinguished channel really knows that this is going on for 11 years. Russia illegally annexed Crimea in 2014, the day I was sworn in as a Prime Minister of Ukraine. And at that particular period of time, we had no army, no cash, no military, no police, nothing, because the pro-Russian president fled the country. And under that circumstances, we managed to survive 11 years ago. In my treasury, in the state treasury of Ukraine, I had 10,000 euros. Could you imagine? For the entire country. The reason why I'm telling you this is that we managed to withstand armed to the teeth Russia for 11 years. An all-out war has been waged by Russia 3.5 years ago. So he wanted to freeze us. He imposed blackouts during the first winter, and he's going to repeat the same case scenario that winter. We will survive. We will survive, not without losses. And look, it's a hard toil. It is a hard toil, just trust me. You can't even imagine what's being practically every single day, either in the parking lot or in the underground cellar or just nowhere, listening to the noise of drones or missiles. But Ukrainian people showed a very strong resilience. We really have stamina. We will survive and we will win this fight. What is needed? Help. Help us to win the war in order to defend you. Thank you, sir.
Just lastly, before we wrap up, I just want to ask you, obviously, some key events in the last few days, the ones that we discussed at the beginning of this conversation that you yourself described as being a turning point in this conflict. What impact has that had, do you think, on morale in Ukraine?
You mean this U-turn of the US administration?
Yes, and the sanctions.
It is a good move. We strongly welcome this kind of decision. We need real allies. And these allies have a back of Ukraine. So we need real deliverables. So it definitely will help Ukraine to win the war. Whether it's enough, look, sir, it is the war. Everything is needed in order to win the war. But it is a good leverage, and this is the first step of the US administration under President Trump in his second term that clearly shows that Americans are serious about defending Ukraine and helping Ukraine to get a fair and durable peace. At least I believe in this.
Okay, well, we really appreciate you taking the time to speak to Al Arabiya English. Arseniy Yatsenyuk, former Prime Minister of Ukraine. Thank you very much indeed for your time, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Now, turning our attention to the Middle East and for the latest on Gaza, where the Trump administration says it is making progress in its bid towards ending the conflict. Well, a few major challenges remain, of course, including disarming Hamas, returning deceased hostages' bodies and Palestinian prisoners as well, and securing a lasting ceasefire. But one major new hurdle that could threaten President Trump's peace plan is the Knesset's move towards annexing parts of the West Bank. Well, here's what the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio had to say about that.
make of the Israeli parliament moving forward on potential annexation of the West Bank, right?
Well, that's a vote in there. Yeah, that's a vote in the Knesset, but obviously I think the president's made clear that's not something we'd be supportive of right now, and we think is even threatening to the peace deal. We're concerned about anything that threatens to destabilize what we've worked on. The president has achieved something very important here, which is bringing international partners to the table to find something that's enduring in Gaza so we never have another October 7th.
Well, we're joined now by Nadine Sanders, who is the editor-in-chief of International Voice. She joins us now from New York. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us, Nadine. Let me just start by asking you, first of all, I mean, what sort of a message do you think it sends out to the world that while intense diplomatic efforts are being made by one of Israel's very few international allies, namely the United States, the Knesset is entertaining this idea of annexing the occupied West Bank?
Thank you for having me. Actually, this delivered to the world very clearly that the U.S. is really meaning to have the peace in the Middle East. Now, when we hear Rubio talking about that aggressive way against the plan of Israel, they're voting to annexation of West Bank. That's mean this is the red line for the U.S. that Israel trying to break their efforts to maintain this peace in the Middle East. Now, Trump did a lot of things. Also Arab countries had a long run with Trump, with the U.S. administration to achieve this, to reach this point where we could have stages of multiple layers, how to get this peace, which is incredible. Now, when Israel trying to do this, that's mean they are making all the efforts every way that will actually vanish all the dreams of having the peace. That's why you see this reaction from Marco Rubio, also J.D. Vance. Nobody support this annexation to happen at the time being in Palestine.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance said annexing the West Bank is not going to happen, he said. I mean, President Trump said something quite similar as well. I mean, do you interpret that as a sort of a warning to Israel?
It's not just a warning. It's a direct order. I don't think that the Israeli will dare to do this because that will, he said that's insulting. Rubio and J.D. Vance, he said he felt it insulting. That's mean, if you're talking about J.D. Vance talking this way, that's mean that the President Trump will feel the same way, and that will break the relationship between Trump and Netanyahu. That's a major development in the Israeli-American affairs if they continue to do it. So when they say it's not going to happen, that means it's a warning that they're going to break all relationship with the U.S. if they did it. That's why they are pretty sure it's not going to happen.
And not just the U.S., because, of course, there are some Middle Eastern countries that would react extremely negatively to a move like that by Israel.
Yes, but the Middle East countries, they never care about the reaction of Middle East countries. Even though when the Abraham deals happen, still Israel doesn't care. You see the frustration of the U.S., of the Saudi Arabia kingdom. You see the frustration of the UAE. You see the frustration in Bahrain too. But Israel doesn't give an ear for that. Still going and going. The war continued for almost 2 years. 3 years now. So the frustration of the Arab countries will put a pressure on the U.S. administration, on Trump administration, which could work, which is really could do something toward not only the annexation of the West Bank will be challenging, very much challenging. Actually, it would be destroying the deal, but also the plan that being discussed so far that could divided the West Bank to two parts. One part will be controlled by Israel. That's what the U.S. Journal one of the sites mentioned it very clearly in an article that will be divided by two parts. One part will be controlled by Israeli side to maintain the aids to flow into the Palestinian territory, to maintain the peace as well, and the other part will be maintained by Hamas. So that's very dangerous at this point to happen if that what Wall Street Journal say, because that will also be a big rock on this way to happen. It's very challenging what's happening now. We were assuming that the next stage after releasing the hostages and everything, the next stage after that will be very challenging. It will be full of many points that should be considered over and over from every side, and should be more negotiations between the Arab countries and the U.S. administration and the allies as well, because this is not one shot deal and that will happen. This is ongoing, fragile deal that should be maintained in every point with a tremendous pressure. Okay. We know that the Israeli side have that the IPAC in the U.S. and they can, you see also Jared Kushner, his son-in-law for Mr. Trump. So this is a big influence on the American administration. So the Arab countries should practice the same influence or more with the negotiations, with the political ties to reach their point where we need the peace. We really need the peace. We don't need to go back to the mess or to worse scenario than we had before. We had now the fear between Arab countries about this deal of the peace. It was about what if after this deal, and what if after releasing the hostages, Israel went back again to Gaza, and now it's talking about the West Bank. If this is going to happen, that would be a big disappointment in the Middle East, and that will reflect on all over the world. So it's very critical at this time to everybody watch what he's doing, watch what right. he's announcing, and watch how he's dealing with this parts of the deal and with the U.S. administration.
Yeah, I mean, Nadine, this is probably why, isn't it? We've seen so much intense effort on the part of the Trump administration, not just President Trump himself, but his vice president, J.D. Vance, his envoys, Witkoff and Kushner, Marco Rubio is due to visit as well. I mean, they seem absolutely focused, don't they, on not letting this ceasefire deal collapse.
Yes, that's true. But also they are focusing on that. They don't want it to collapse. But also when they go to a critical point, like talking about dividing the West Bank, dividing Gaza to two parts, one of them will be controlled by Israel, even temporary. This could end up with the forever thing. So this is very critical. Maybe they're doing that in a good intention. Maybe they're trying to keep this peace deal steady and firm, which is not for now. We see too many violations here and there, but also the plans they are looking for, of this suggesting that they are doing, should be very careful and should be considered with the Arab countries, should not be only considered with the Israeli part. So it's very critical to think every way, deal with everybody, and before announcing any plan or even consider it in a serious way.
Okay, I mean, just lastly, obviously the 20-point peace plan came into effect, phase one of it, earlier on this month. Now comes the dialogue for the second phase. And I just want to ask you lastly, what major hurdles you anticipate at this second stage?
I think there is few points. Who's gonna be involved in maintaining the peace? We're talking about troops. Now, UK troops, some of the UK troops joined to the US troops, but it's in a minor amount, it's not in huge troops, but also there is consideration of Arab troops like Qatar, Saudi Arabia, UAE. So this is a point that we should, it's critical as well, because not everybody agreed for this. Everybody want to make sure that this is not going to be a new occupation of Gaza by other parties, not only Israeli parties. So this could be clear and arranged very well. Also, there is about the rebuilding. Who's going to invest in this rebuilding? Is also going to be Gulf money? Is it going to be only U.S. money, international aid? Who's going to be rebuilding this? Because nobody want to see Gaza turn out to a city that is not Palestinian anymore. But also we need to see the money flow in and build up the city. So it's the having all of this joined together to make sure that we have a beautiful Gaza city under a multi-control of multi-countries, which is clearly looking to have independent Gaza, not occupied Gaza in any way.
Okay, well, we really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us. We've run out of time. Nadine Sanders, Editor-in-Chief of International Voice, thank you very much for your time. Well, it is Thursday, which means it's time now for our weekly US segment, taking a look at some of the top stories making the headlines in the United States. Well, joining me this week, I'm joined by Republican strategist Angie Wong and Amanda Mackey, both joining me from Florida and both very good friends of the show. Great to have you both with us, and thanks for joining us from Florida. Let's start by talking about the latest on Ukraine, because we were talking about that at the top of the show, how President Trump has done a bit of a U-turn here, it seems. Sanctions on Russian oil companies. He's not going to be meeting President Putin in Budapest. Angie, let me start by asking you. I mean, how significant is this shift on the part of President Trump?
No, I don't think it's all that surprising, actually. I mean, Russia got what it wanted, which was, Zelensky was just at the White House last Friday, and he was asking for Tomahawk and long-range missiles. He didn't get them. So as soon as that deal fell apart, Russia said, well, I don't think we need to meet anymore, President Trump. So I think that's what's happening. President Trump, he knows he's being pulled from both sides. He's being played by Russia. And now he's saying, well, okay, if you're going to play me and so publicly, I am now going to, do my list of things that I need to do to get you back onto, the negotiating table, including the, putting sanctions on Russian oil companies. We've long known that that is exactly the plan that President Trump wants. He needs to cut off the financing machine that goes to Russia to finance all these wars. And going after the oil companies, that is step number one.
Okay, Amanda, what's your take?
Well, I think we have to talk about the First Lady here, because I think what she has seen with the most recent bombing of a kindergarten in Ukraine, you can just see that the First Lady is getting tired of the antics being played by President Putin. The fact that President Trump has been trying to work things out with him and it's not going anywhere. So in a way, Putin has been embarrassing President Trump. And of course, the First Lady doesn't like that. But maybe even more importantly, the First Lady opened a dialogue with President Putin on the Ukrainian children, over 30,000 children that were basically taken from Ukraine. And so she wants those children to come back. She has had an open dialogue with him. And I think she wants to see that be furthered, in addition to stopping the war. I think the latest of what we saw on whether it was a preschool or a kindergarten, that's very harrowing. That's very jarring to see that children are now being attacked. And I think that is the most important, maybe the most propelling thing here, is that President Trump is now saying, I'm putting my foot down. We are imposing sanctions and we're going to make it hurt. And that's where you've heard, I believe it was Medvedev today, he said, this is counterproductive, or it was Lavrov. I don't remember, but he said it was counterproductive. So Russia's coming out and saying, this is going to be counterproductive. So they're in a way threatening because now they're feeling pain. Right.
And I'm assuming that you both agree that these sanctions are going to inflict some pretty major pain on the Russian economy. I mean, we're talking about, their biggest product here, which is, oil and gas. Angie, I mean, what's the anticipated response do you think going to be from Russia? Do you think this is going to bring them to the negotiating table?
Well, we're going to see about that. But, you know, the very first kind of messaging to Putin was about 2 weeks ago during the Middle East Peace Summit, where essentially he was signaling to Putin that, you know, we're going to cut off your oil because we have calm in the Middle East yet. No, you have to understand, President Trump understands that a peaceful Middle East is very bad for business, for Beijing, for Tehran, and also for Moscow. So he was already telling Putin, you better come to the table. We're doing this peace deal. Jump on in. When that essentially olive branch was thrown away, Putin just decided, well, you know, we're not going to meet like we had discussed in Budapest. And now Trump is saying, what do I have to do now to get you to the table? Because I could do a lot of things. So the first step will be sanctions on Russian oil. The next step could be freezing oligarchs' bank accounts here in the U.S. and outside of the U.S. And then there's also stopping any sort of arms being traded to Russia and from Russia. So there are many, many facets to this. And you're gonna see Trump now just going down the list every time that Putin plays with him, every time that he cancels a meeting, every time he decides not to have any sort of negotiations with Zelensky. We're gonna see this play out and probably drag out for the rest of the year.
Yeah, and Amanda, do you think President Trump has reached the point where he just feels like President Putin just looks like he's running circles around him? I mean, we had that Alaska summit. There was going to be this Budapest summit that's now not going to happen. I mean, do you think that was a sort of he had a bit of a moment of realization that it was just a waste of time holding talks face to face with him?
I think President Trump wants to be the president of peace and not war. So I don't think he wanted to propel this to war. Last Friday, when the Ukrainian president was here at the White House, obviously, we've all been talking about it, he asked for Tomahawk missiles. And President Trump really tried to slow that and say, well, I don't want to escalate this. And then here we are less than a week later with the president saying, I don't see any other way to do this because Putin's not playing. He's not willing to engage in serious a debate, discussion, dialogue, anything that is meaningful in any way that's going to not do anything than what Putin's been doing, which is basically moving the goalpost. So I think another thing that could be in the toolbox, if you will, is that there is a resolution in Congress with over 85 members, bipartisan. My gosh, there's nothing bipartisan in Washington right now, certainly not these days, but for this resolution imposing sanctions on Ukraine. And so I think you can see some furtherance of that. And maybe a way for Congress to come together is to be united on their front with the president on Ukraine and helping Ukraine against Russia. And so I think that's something that we could possibly see. And then obviously, I think it's really important that now we're seeing the White House engaging with the UN to say, we're going to do everything we can to help in this, because as President Trump said yesterday, apparently Europeans can't, we need to come in. I can help. I will help.
Okay, and Amanda, while you're there, let's just move on to our next topic, which is the Middle East. It's already come up in conversation already in this short discussion between us. And of course, it's been a really busy week, hasn't it, for US diplomacy? I mean, it's been a busy several weeks, really. But the presence of the US president, the US vice president, the special envoys, Kushner, Witkoff, J.D. Vance was there yesterday. And we're told Marco Rubio is on the way. I mean, there is so much momentum, isn't there? And they really don't seem to want to let this deal run any risks of collapsing. What are your thoughts, Amanda?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, President Trump said it yesterday, as far as I'm concerned, you know, we're just moving forward into the next phases of this. So now they're doing everything to make sure that not only are our military, you know, Central Command out of Tampa, the eyes and ears of the military there, but actual political eyes and ears, which in some cases is extremely important, maybe more important, to see that the leaders are not just saying, all right, we signed the paper, the ink's dry, we're now moving on to the next thing. thing. Now, President Trump did say when he was at, I believe it was at Sharm el-Sheikh, he said, we're moving on to Ukraine. We're going to help solve that. Then we're going to move on to Iran. We're going to solve that. So he is wanting these to build. And so if this doesn't succeed, it makes it really hard for President Trump to do all the other things that he wants to do, Ukraine being the first thing that he wants to move to now, which obviously he's moved in that direction. So it is really important that these peace deals stay in place because, as J.D. Vance said yesterday, it seems like the media wants them to fail. It seems like the media doesn't want to see success here, and that's a terrible thing. We want, of course, to see peace in the Middle East. That's what happened last week. And so we're going to move in furtherance of that, and hopefully with Ukraine and Russia and maybe even with Iran.
Sure. Well, I mean, I think a lot of people where I'm sitting definitely want to see things succeed on this diplomatic front. And, Angie, just turning to you, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it, to see how President Trump he's positioning himself as being a very fair mediator here. On the one hand, he had strong words for Hamas, disarm or else. And on the other hand, the Trump administration's been pretty irritated by the sounds of things about this idea of annexing the West Bank, which was discussed in the Knesset yesterday. I mean, after all the effort that's been made, I mean, I expect they find that quite insulting, don't they?
Well, phase 2 of the peace plan was always going to be the hardest, right? To ask Hamas to disarm and to demilitarize. That was something that was going to take a lot more negotiating. But look, President Trump and the Trump administration got exactly what they wanted out of this deal already. They got the hostages back to their families, which was always what President Trump and this administration had wanted. So they have a win there. He is certainly the peace president for doing so. Now, the rest of the redevelopment of Gaza and all the zones that were bombed out during the war, that is really kind of where the prize is, because that's how President Trump was able to invite almost 30 world leaders to come to be part of this peace plan, because they all want a piece of it as well. They all want to be part of the redevelopment. President Trump has long said that this could be the Middle East Riviera, and we expect a lot of real estate development to happen in those regions that can benefit everyone in that region. So I think that is what they're going to be working towards. That's why pretty much all of the major heads of the Trump administration are all visiting that region right now, is to make sure that this deal somewhat stays in place. Good signs that both Israel and Hamas has both said, yes, there were some bombings in the recent days, but it seems like this peace plan is still on track to succeed.
Okay, let's move on to our next topic, because there was a heated debate in New York last night. Obviously, there is the mayoral election coming up. We've got the candidates Zoran Mamdani, the Democrat, Andrew Cuomo, Independent, and Curtis Sliwa as a Republican candidate. They opened with some pretty sharp barbs as they outlined their vision for the city's future. Let's just take a little look at some of the exchanges from last night.
My main opponent has no new ideas. He has no new plan. It's Bill de Blasio rehash, and we know how that turned out.
While there are 3 candidates on the stage, you will hear only 2 messages. My opponents, who spend more time trying to convince the other to drop out than actually proposing their own policies, will speak only of the past, because that's all that they know. Andrew Cuomo will spend much of tonight attacking me. He is a desperate man, lashing out because he knows that the one thing he's always cared about, power, is now slipping away from him.
Next is Andrew Cuomo. Good evening.
Both my adversaries have decided to bump chests with President Trump to prove who's more macho. You can't beat Trump. He holds most of the cards. He's already cut federal funding for Medicaid, for the SNAP program, and is threatening to cut funds for NYCHA. So if you're all of a sudden going to get adversarial, you're going to lose.
Okay, Curtis Sliwa having the last word there in that debate. Amanda, I don't know if you watched the debate, but I just wanted to ask you, I mean, we're 10 days away from Election Day in New York. I mean, how's this race shaping up?
Well, really not even 10 days because early voting starts Saturday. So, it's really moving, and the movement and momentum has always been with Zoran Mamdani, much to the chagrin of many people in conservative circles, even independents. As shocking as it may be, although the opponents have tried to pull out all the stops, you have a problem in that Curtis Sliwa refuses to get out of the race. He's the Republican in order to, help the other candidate here. But the problem really is that even with that, Zoran Mamdani still wins. Cuomo does not. And so that's what the polling is showing right now. I think this is just very unsettling for a lot of Americans because we are shocked that the largest city in the United States, the financial hub of the world, is now going to be handed to a Democrat socialist. But I do say for Republicans, you now have the opportunity to say this is the party of Zoran Mamdani, and it is a very good talking point in an election year that is coming up next year for the congressional and senatorial races.
Okay, Angie, I want to ask you for your take. That debate last night seemed to get quite personal at some stages. How do you see this race panning out?
Well, I thought Andrew Cuomo finally woke up and started campaigning. We have large being in the media here trying to help Republicans as well as anyone who's running against Zoran Mamdani. We haven't been given a lot of materials because the candidates are largely not covered and they're not giving a lot of campaigning talking points. So it was great to see Andrew Cuomo finally waking up. As far as Curtis Sliwa, he's been at it, although his numbers are actually going down, which is surprising at this late in the race. How I see it happening is that Democrats really need a win here in 2025. This is a reaction to the 2024 election. This is a reaction to the Trump presidency. And I think that's how they're turning out the numbers. And Polymarket has a Zoran Mamdani win. Now, when I do the autopsy of the 2025 election on November 5th, we're going to see how much money was poured into this race by Democrats because they know that if they didn't have a win in 25 and perhaps in 26, that they're going to be the minority party for a while. So this is a very, very important win for Democrats. Now, I agree with my colleague there that, these are great talking points for the midterms, and this is going to be great talking points for a future gubernatorial race in New York. But right now, we do have to prepare for a Zoran Mamdani win.
Yeah, just before we move on to our next topic, Amanda, I want to ask you, how much do you think it's about the characters of those three men? They're really quite different, aren't they, as individuals? And how much is it about their policies that's really resonating and chiming with New Yorkers?
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of when President Obama came on the scene when he was campaigning, and you had all these people who he had ties to that were people that were uncomfortable for people to think that he had associations with. But the reality was that he was such an incredible orator. He had such sophistication when he spoke that he kind of reeled people in. And I think that's what the allure is with someone like Zoran Mamdani. He is someone that is pleasant to look at. And when he talks, he says all the right things. He has no facts to base it on. He has nothing to say as to how he's going to pay for all these things. He has no way of saying that I've talked to the governor who has to actually approve these things that he's trying to fulfill, but people like listening to him. And a lot of times that's what wins in politics. And that's certainly who Barack Obama was. And he was able to push ideas along that even as, socialist, bordering on socialist as they were, people were still willing to give him the chance because he was an incredible orator.
And just picking up on what Amanda was saying there, Angie, do you think the appearance of the Democrat candidate is perhaps his trump card in this race?
Well, I think beyond that, look, everything has been thrown at Zoran Mamdani to dirty him up, including one of the best lines from yesterday's debate, which is he has no experience, right? I think it was Curtis Sliwa who said he could list his resume on a cocktail napkin, right? And I love those lines because it does show off how young and inexperienced Zoran Mamdani is. But here's the thing, New Yorkers don't care. And I think that is one of the greatest lessons we're going to learn from the 2025 elections, is that you don't actually need to have experience to run the city of New York City. And that's what New York City voters are going to be picking. So, I guess charm, vibes, marketing, all that trumps any sort of experience needed for a huge job like this. He's going to be running 300,000 people, personnel in New York City, and managing billions of dollars. Someone who, barely graduated college and barely has any work experience. That's what we have to look forward to.
Okay, well, Angie, you paint such a nice picture there. Let's just, while you're there, let me ask you first about the US government shutdown. I mean, it just keeps going on. I don't know what day we're on now, but is there any end in sight?
Yeah, this is day 23, and it's becoming a really interesting fight because on November 1st, we have a lot of deadlines, including the supplemental dietary program, which ends food supplements for about 40 million people actually here in the U.S. So I think that's going to be the first time that I'm going to see Americans really feeling the pinch. Yes, our U.S. parks are closed. Yes, TSA is being strained, and there's a lot of holiday travel coming around, but most Americans haven't really felt the pinch yet. But I think come November 1st, that's when I think Republicans have to really think about whether or not to use the nuclear option in the Senate to get the filibuster and get that tossed so that at least they can have a majority vote and stop the government shutdown. I think we're almost there, but right now we're letting Democrats have their way and trying to blame it on Republicans for the shutdown when it's really just Democrats voting down every single vote to reopen the government.
Okay, and Amanda, I mean, your thoughts on this shutdown, where it might end. And I just want to ask you as well, while you're at it, I mean, are you starting to notice it in your life? And do you see it having a detrimental effect on the US economy?
So I'll start with the latter question. And DC has changed a little bit in that it is not as plagued with traffic. It's just not as busy. Of course, that's because the tourists really aren't coming. If they had plans, what's the point of coming when national parks are closed? Now, some of the parks are open. Statue of Liberty is open, for example, but by and large, they're closed or limited in some way. So Washington has become a shell of itself. With regards to me personally, of course, when you're thinking about going to the airport and even flying, you just kind of wonder, is this going to be a time where I have to, be in line for hours? Hopefully TSA agents are showing up. I always thank them when they're coming to work, knowing that they're not getting a paycheck. So with regards to what Angie mentioned about the SNAP program, for example, which is hugely important, obviously the numbers are 40 million plus Americans that get those programs to be able to have food. And then you have other programs that help with paying for electricity and other bills. And obviously we're going into winter right now. So for heating bills, the program's called LIHEAP. And so there's other things that are happening. But I think the biggest thing that is going to make a difference here is that on November 1st, people are going to get their premium increases for insurance. I know a lot of your viewers don't know about all that because here we buy private insurance. But that is going to be a huge turning point because that's what the Democrats have been fighting on. So hopefully there can be a resolution to this. But I have always said this was a subsidy from the COVID era. It should have been done away with. If the Democrats wanted it so badly, they could have enacted it into law. They did not. And the reason they didn't is because it is a huge cost driver. And so for President Trump, the Democrats and Republicans to come together to reopen the government is very important. But I think it hinges on this because the Democrats sure have made it very much about this. The other programs, whether we fund, air traffic controllers on a separate bill or the SNAP program for food for the indigent and needy, those may be done separately, maybe. But the big issue here is the health insurance premiums, and that's where Democrats are stuck on.
Okay, Amanda, you've had the last word. We're out of time, I'm told, but it's been great fun talking to you both. Really appreciate it. Amanda Mackey and Angie Wong, two Republican strategists in red in Florida. What are the odds of that? Thank you both very much indeed for joining us here on Al Arabiya English.
Thank you, Tom.
Well, that is all we have time for on Global News today. Thank you very much indeed for watching. Be sure to join us tomorrow for a look back at some of the best interviews of the week. Until then, bye-bye.